Well, Paul, it's only been a matter of weeks since the last time that we were together with Jeevan and on the topic of independence in Alberta when we were in Calgary. And now here we are just weeks later. A lot has happened politically in Alberta. And now we actually have a referendum on the way, says the Premier.
Yeah, a referendum, actually. So she did a 12-minute speech on this referendum on February 19th, which is very significant because you know what happened on the 18th?
Tell me.
Mad General.
Oh, that's true. We had a crossing.
Remember we had the crossing. So it's very interesting. And, you know, I did a show, Jeevan, and this is a very interesting show. I'll send it to you to watch. But, you know, it's the straw that broke the camel's back, right? And it's the more things you pile on to Alberta and the more things like this you do. And I, you know, strategically, I watched this and I thought to myself, if I'm sitting in the prime minister's spot, would I have even done that? Given where Alberta sits right now and what's going on in Alberta? And the answer came to mind right away was no. But all of a sudden, he crosses, she comes out. Now, I know she's got budgets and everything going on and she has to, deal with her own political parties within the province. But she comes out and she says, okay, now let's talk about a referendum.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Good political strategy in my mind. And she says, let's talk about why we are where we are. So the first thing she hits on, she says, and it's very clever. She says, you know what? I'm going to give you the good news. The good news is oil's starting to go up. We're starting to get some movement on a number of fronts in the province. And we have an MOU that's imminent for the pipeline.
Right.
And the way she positions it, so brilliantly done if you listen to the speech. The way she positions it, she says she hopes. So she hopes that the pipeline will come. She doesn't say it's coming. She hopes that the mandate of the MOU will take place, which then makes you go take a look and you say, well, what's actually going on with the pipeline?
What's been guaranteed
right now?
Yeah.
If anything, because since the announcement of the MOU, Jeevan, have you heard anything?
Well, as far as the pipeline's concerned, I'll make a comment on that. I've talked to a couple of people who are in the oil and gas industry, and they look at these investments. The major risk with the pipeline is, fine, you have EB to deal with, you have the Indigenous to deal with, so it's not guaranteed. Plus, in the old days, when you had to put a pipeline in, you determine the route that it's will be dug, and you simply just put the pipeline in, and you're finished in a couple of years. And now there's so many issues that are to be dealt with, because if you look at the Trans Mountain Pipeline, there was environmental laws. There was some sort of a bird or a frog that their habitat was endangered. So you could spend billions redesigning, and that's a risk that none of the pipelines are going to take. So that's number one to consider. And the MOU simply right now is just an understanding. There's nothing concrete about it. MOUs fail sometimes, and nobody knows right now. The MOU to us on the independence movement just represents a softening of the issue, but we know that pipeline is going to cost billions, and will there be a private company willing to take the risk? And in our minds, we doubt that very much, and the taxpayer cannot come to the rescue again, because the Trans Mountain, instead of costing around $5 billion by private industry, cost the taxpayers over $34 billion. It's not even flowing at full capacity, so there's room in there. So we're trying to understand the MOU at the same time, but we believe in the independence movement that nothing will be satisfied. Carney is against pipelines. EV is most important to him. And don't forget the industrial carbon tax that's heavily imposed on Alberta. Who will take that risk? So far, we'll have to see.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting. So I took a look, and I went and I said, okay, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole, and I'm going to see what has happened. You know what's happened in the MOU that the only thing I could pull out, the only thing I could find is that Alberta's government is preparing a detailed submission for the Major Projects Office. Remember the Major Projects Office?
Yeah.
So out of that whole MOU and out of that whole discussion, and this is kind of my beef lately with government in general in Canada, we do these crazy projects plans,
Yep.
or we talk about the concepts. Then we ask for a project plan. Then we sit around and talk about it for a long time. You know, you think at the time that we had the MOU, we would have had a project plan in place, a funding mechanism to catapult this pipeline into gear, but it's going to be submitted in July.
So we're
year.
middle of the summer before anybody even makes an application to what could be done here. Here's the proposal that we have in mind. At that point, I would assume there's a processing time, a digestion time. Then there's a rebuttal period.
Summer. There's no government.
And there's nobody around to
There's
really.
no one around. There's government in Canada. Like they don't come back till the fall. So July becomes the fall. So what have we done again? We've managed to move a pipeline through an entire year again. And I think this is the frustration with Danielle Smith.
Government.
It is. It's even
right?
We're accruing it.
Yeah, we're accruing this into the future. And trust me, we're a great investment. You know, one of the things, Jeevan,
So I just make a comment that don't forget in the past, Enbridge pulled out us spending billions of dollars on, I believe it was the Northern Gateway pipeline.
Yeah.
They pulled out after spending more than $1 billion on documentation design. TMX, TransCanada pulled out of the Trans Mountain, spending billions. So a lot of investors already know that this is what they will have to put up with, and who is going to take the risk, that's still to be shown. And you know, I'm glad you made the point that for us in Canada to get projects in the ground takes so many years. You know, the average mining, if you wanted to do a mining project in Canada, it takes about 14 to 16 years to get through all the approvals.
It's absolutely ridiculous compared to the market. This is why we're missing the market on a regular basis. We do it with oil, we do it with natural gas. We've done it with all of our mining opportunities.
We do it with the Olympics. We do it with everything. It's not only resource projects, it's now sports.
At a time where we need to be taking steps not on the ice, hoping to get across, we need to actually take a risk and make a jump on so many things. You know, Jeevan, one of the things when I heard Danielle Smith's speech, my first reaction to it was, does this kind of fly in the face of independence in the sense that the referendum really doesn't get specific about that at all? And in fact, it felt to me like she's got independence as a threat mechanism to get a better position ongoing with the federal government. Does that feel like that to you?
That you're partially right. Yes, the threat of independence is always there as leverage and negotiating tactic, but the referendum questions that she broke it down in two categories: non-constitutional and constitutional. And if you go through each one of those questions, which Albertan is going to say no to any of those questions, right?
Of course.
No, nobody will. And if you're a far left person, you know, believes in the NDP, the Liberals, I even think you would have difficult time living in Alberta saying no to any of these questions that are posed. So I think it's a tactic used to get people to think about independence, get people to think, what does it mean to live in Alberta, and get people to at least have critical thought when they are reading these questions, instead of simply in an election, you know, you just mark an X beside the person you like without any critical thought. And that's what's been happening in elections in Canada for the last, 40, 50 years. So we're in the independence movement. We believe these questions are good because it gets people to think about independence and move the needle along to independence. Because if you're sitting on the fence in Alberta thinking about whether independence is correct or not, these questions, you will have to read and think about them. And hopefully that will lead you onto the path of favoring independence.
So do you think that this is good pre-promotion, as it were, for a referendum specifically on independence, or does this delay that in some way? It almost it felt to me, as a guy not in Alberta at the moment, it felt to me like a delay tactic on the topic of independence. In other words, if we can get all this stuff straightened out for Alberta, then, you know, we probably won't become an independent nation.
Yeah, so she has said in her conference, this was one of the questions asked, that if the independence movement can foster all those signatures, she will put it on the referendum if it satisfies, I mean, the question satisfies the constitutional clearance on it. And if we get the required number of signatures, and then it's verified by Elections Alberta, she will put the question on the referendum. However, a constitutional amendment question is standalone. So I can see that there'll be two ballots, one for the questions that she has proposed, those 9 questions, and then there'll be a separate ballot on the independence.
Yeah, that's the impression that I was given by her speech, actually. This is a referendum. I'm calling absolutely on this. I've made a commitment to the petitions and, you know, moving that referendum along, but it didn't seem to me that those would occur at the same time. Maybe they will in separate ballots.
Yeah, but there'll be separate ballots. And, you know, you have to know our premier a little bit. She truly believes in the power to the people, because that's her background. You know, if you look at her when she was at the Fraser Institute, when I was with the Wild Rose Party in 2012, she was a leader. She believes in, you know, people having responsibility. And that's why if you look at her, her form of governance and you look at her ministers, and this is why she gave them a letter at the start of the year that, you know, this is your responsibility. This is what I expect from you. This is what has to be carried out. And she does not believe in central control. She believes in giving power and thereby thought to the people and to her ministers. That's why they're acting also very independently, which and you know, which is the way to govern. It's really difficult to govern from a centralized location, as you can see. You know, with Justin Trudeau, how central the power was with Gerald Butts and Trudeau, and was it Tate, the president of the party, and Chrystia Freeland, just a few people. And that was the complaint from a lot of the Liberal MPs, that they had no input into whatever they thought into the powers be in the Liberal Party. So this is why I believe that they swayed and made so many wrong decisions. And even if you, so this is my opinion is, you have to listen to others, because a lot of people have good ideas. And, you know, I, as a central figure, or, you know, if I was a premier or if I was a minister, I don't have all the good ideas. I don't have all the high intelligence. A lot of people do. I mean, look at you, Paul and Mike. I mean, you're excellent journalists. You come up with good questions and good rapport. And, you know, I have to think about my answers when you're asking the question.
Well, you know, it's funny because the last time that we had a discussion, one of the comments got me, and it warmed my heart, Jeevan, because having met you, I know you're a sweet, lovely guy, and you've got a passion. We definitely made a bond, and I thought that was nice for us all in Calgary. But the viewers took the same approach. One of the comments said, "Gee, I never thought independence was such a reasonable conversation," which is really what needs to happen. I mean, if that was the case historically in Canadian politics, if we had more of these discussions, if there was legitimate think tanks, we would realize that we have to go to the people. We have to hear the voice of the people that are living within the boundaries of our concern. And you're right. I think Danielle Smith has always made that commitment. Actually, she's put Alberta first in every way, and often in very difficult moments.
Yeah, agreed. And I love how candid she is. So, you know, she comes out and she says, listen, when I took office, oil was $90 a barrel. It's $60 a barrel right now. And quite frankly, I had a surplus. I had it in my heritage fund. Quite frankly, I'm digging into my heritage fund, and there's no transfer payments in this province anymore. So
Right.
think about that. That's eerie if you think about it. So
They're actually independent at the moment.
yeah, so she's
Financially.
basically not transferring any
Yeah.
money because so therefore they've met a challenge in their budget, and so she's sitting there saying Alberta alone is starting to struggle now. It's struggling because the price of oil. It's struggling because immigration policies, the number of people you brought in. You know, you've added. I think it was
600,000.
600,000. Yeah, it was 2001 was 3 million. And now it's actually going to top out somewhere around 5 million, right?
Yeah, and then
from
600,000 in Alberta. That's what she had identified.
yeah.
Into
So
Alberta,
it's you know,
It's
they
not
can't
sustainable.
handle.
No, and so
No.
if the source of our funding for so many things in this country is now at a deficit,
Look at Ontario.
we're as a nation, yeah, that's a great.
You know, look
that's
at
a great
Ontario.
example.
Ontario's not coming up for air either.
No.
So, you know, you used to have Alberta and Ontario and some of the other provinces would bounce back and forth. Now they're all negative.
Resources in one part of the country, finance in another part of the country, real estate and mining in another part, but all of those are at a failed position right now. And Alberta feels this in a big way. We talked about this the last time. Jeevan, you're living it. I mean, when the price of oil is not competitive, your life changes.
And you know, I can see we can say the trend of oil is going to go up. Okay, that's what the trends are showing, and maybe you'll hit $90-$100 again. But you also have to remember when in 2014 oil was at negative $30 a barrel.
Right.
Alberta was still contributing in equalization. They were asking, the oil industry was asking for help because Bombardier gets assistance, the auto industry gets assistance, everybody in the East, you know, if industries fail, they're getting assistance. And Justin just refused to even examine what was happening in Alberta. So, you know, we've suffered long enough. We've encountered a lot of these types of policies, you know, from the Liberal Party. And each time this makes the independence movement stronger and stronger. And I just want to make a point getting back to you that, you know, it's nice to have decent conversations. And I, as a canvasser to get petition signatures, we've had I've participated in a few pop-up events where we just put out a table, get 3 canvassers with petition sheets on a sidewalk or public land. And, you know, we do get a really good response. People stop by, they sign, and you know, they ask for information where else they can, which website they can enter. But a few times you get people flipping you the bird or calling you unpatriotic. And I just wish those people would stop by and ask me, why do you favor independence? You know, let's have a discussion. I think I've only encountered one person that was not independently minded, but willing to have a discussion with me and say, you know what? Oh, and he's a really good friend of mine. So, and he's a retired fireman. He's a retired fireman, and I just send him by text some stats, and you know, he sent me some stats, and I said, well, this is money that Alberta already sends to Ottawa. We're just getting it back. And he says, well, you can manipulate stats as you want. So, but anyway, we just continue to have a really good discussion, and I'm trying to understand him, and he's trying to understand me. So I wish more people would stop by instead of flipping me the bird.
It's valuable. You know what? Even if you got to flip the bird, at least stop by and have a chat, you know, like, or save the bird to the end of the conversation. Let's be fair about it. You know, I wanted to ask this, Paul, and
Sure.
Maybe this was on your mind as well. Some of the critics and legal experts, we talked about this, we touched on it slightly the last time we got together. They believe that Alberta cannot legally secede under the Canadian Constitution, even if a referendum shows a majority support. So What's the practical roadmap from a yes? You and I talked about this in brief with Paul the last time, but now that there's more legal weigh in on this, how do you get from point A to point B, from referendum to independence? Has that been a plan that's been presented to Albertans and to the government?
So what I know is that if, according to the Clarity Act, once you have the referendum question passed by Albertans, and it's simply, to us, it means 50+1, and you start negotiations on independence, and somehow if those negotiations fail and cannot carry on any further, there is a clause in the Clarity Act, which was, I read it on Twitter as well from one of our experts, that if those negotiations fail, then the province can declare unilaterally independence. And all that has to happen is to be recognized by another country. And we've got 4 countries, I believe, that are willing to recognize us. US, Argentina, Hungary, and I forget the 4th one, who it was. But so, everybody, we're hoping everybody negotiates in good faith if the referendum passes. If not, this is the way. In addition, yesterday, there was a by-election in Quebec. A Parti Québécois candidate won. Well, where's the anger there? Where's the unpatriotic sentiment there? Okay. It's so unequal when we see this happening as Albertans, that we're called unpatriotic and we're called all sorts of names from a very small minority. But look at the media. Have they responded to the Parti Québécois winning that by-election, saying this cannot happen in Canada? No.
Well, I mean,
this is what makes Albertans upset.
It's equal to somebody crossing the floor out of the province.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that?
Living in BC, but having run in Alberta. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. It's interesting. And in her speech, she was very definitive. That was what caught me, and I, having watched it multiple times, she says, Alberta will double our pipeline capacity over the next 10 years. Our producers will grow and fill the pipe. We will not permit Alberta's and Canada's most valuable resource deposits worth almost 10 trillion to remain in the ground to the detriment of millions of Canadians. That's not going to happen. And then that was her segue into her questions. So she was, the way she planted that, she kind of put that kind of fork in the ground, and she said, okay, so that's done. That is going to happen. Now, July is kind of a very interesting time, because when July is, we're going to have a busy July in Canada for summer. Kuzma is coming up, right? She's going to put in her major projects, and she's saying like, okay, enough time. She's now in a budget deficit. So she doesn't want to stay in a budget deficit. So she's putting kind of the pressure on to say, I'm going to sit around and wait for a while, but after a while, you got to get moving. So this is all kind of culminating into the October timeframe,
many things have to occur and show sunlight before a fall referendum in Alberta. So she's basically shot a flare into the air for the federal government, saying, okay, Carney, here's what, this is what we're talking about. I've made it real clear. And in the fall, we're going to visit it as a province.
Yep. And here's your timeline.
You better get there by this timeline.
Yeah. So, do what you want, travel to as many countries that, quite frankly, you don't export anything to right now. Have fun. But when you get back, we better go back to business, right?
I think we better do a poll.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. One of the things I wanted to point out, sorry, and I don't mean to pull off of this, but you just made me think. I was reading a recent poll, and I don't know if you know this, I'm not a huge poll lover. Having said that, a recent poll shows that support for Alberta leaving Canada remains in a minority position. Fewer than 3 in 10, or 29% Albertans, say they'd vote for the province to leave. What do these results in the poll mean to an independent movement?
Well, to us, it really means nothing. We're focused on getting our signatures, talking to people in our town halls, and we know that the 30% are in favor of total independence, 30% are not. It's the 30% in the middle that sit on the fence. And when they're reading these questions that our premier has presented, and these are going to get the 30% who are sitting on the fence to think and move one way or the other. And, even if you're running in office, look how many times the polls have been wrong. Okay. You're focused on, even myself, when I'm running campaigns, I focus on door knocking, connecting with the voters, discussing issues. I don't even look at polls. The only poll that matters is at the very end, that if you win or not. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the only poll that we're considering. We're just focused on completing our mission. And we don't even look at the polls. Those polls reported by the media, who are really employees of the government because they get subsidies from the government, and they're going to have the government talking points. And the other polls, as independent media reports, they're up to, sometimes I read up to 40%. Even then, I'm not paying attention to that. We don't pay attention to that. It could be a 50. We want to focus on getting our signatures, getting our message, and moving forward towards independence.
Yeah. Well, I think that's,
Jeevan, are you, you probably get asked this all the time, so you don't have to answer it, but are you over, are you close, or are you over your number?
So right now, no one has an idea because all those petition sheets are sitting with canvassers, and they fill them out. They sit with canvassers. Some of them get mailed to head office. A lot of them are, sitting. I've asked some to be returned to me because I am the regional co-leader for my riding, and nobody will know probably till towards the end of April because for the next couple of weeks, everybody's going to be trying to send in their signed sheets, and so that at least head office has some sort of an idea where we're at. But really, nobody's going to know till the very end of April, early May. I mean, there's no way to even guess at it. But you look at all the lineups. I mean, there was a signing in Yuma, Arizona, because a lot of people in Western Canada, they vacation or go winter holidays in Arizona, and Eastern Canadians go to Florida. Like 300 people showed up in Yuma. Yuma is a very small town. So
wow.
they came to sign. So we have signings in Arizona and Mexico. And you look at here that on a whole day, somebody will set out a table like at -10 for a couple of hours, and they're getting 20, 30 signatures. So the movement is focused on that.
What's your gut tell you though, Jeevan? How close to the line or how far over it have you guys gone, do you think? Just your prediction.
Well, I'm living in a bubble, right? So, and I try to remove myself out of the bubble because I try to read what the opposition is saying, what others are saying about independence, or what their view is on independence, and they're anti-independence supporters. So I don't want to be in the bubble too much. I like to be outside, but in the bubble, if I'm in the bubble and go, oh, geez, it's going so good, right? And I mean, to get 200,000 signatures that are verified by Elections Alberta, and I hope we're close. I hope we're close. We have approximately 50 more days to go. We're trying to get over. We're trying to get to 400,000, I believe, or even 1 million. But let's see. I think we're close. That's because I'm in the bubble.
I like that admission, by the way. That's very human.
Yeah, no, it's very good. Hey, but I want to touch on you because you mentioned it earlier. The questions, the 9 questions. And so I found it very interesting how it spurred conversation. I love this because we do long form podcasting all week long. And I love when someone puts something into the biosphere, the air, the atmosphere, and it incites a bunch of conversations. So she does her speech, and the first 5 questions revolve around immigration policy. So, healthcare immigration policy, social services immigration policy, how they're funded, whether or not you believe that people should be in the country at least a year before they start to receive them, whether people should participate in funding them before they become a permanent resident. They're all good questions, right? So, I'm looking at this, and the first thing I thought is, well, I thought they were strange questions, but then I started reading them, and the one that got me the most, Jeevan and Mike, was the one: to vote in Alberta election, you must be 18 and an ordinarily resident in Alberta.
So you actually had to prove that you, for the most part, live in Alberta.
Yeah.
You're an Albertan.
Yeah. So you must be registered, you must be an Albertan, you must be 18. I'm like, okay, that's just given, I think.
Yeah, I thought so too.
So, but she seemed to put that in there. And then quite frankly, the rest of them, right after she says it, of course, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party pick up on it, and they go to the House and they have quite a long debate. And it's interesting to watch. It actually occurred yesterday. They have a huge debate about healthcare, the condition of healthcare, and immigration. And so it's kind of funny because this premier, a very bright premier, instigated a conversation. Then it seemed, I kind of laughed because it seemed like all of a sudden this was a new thought for all these people in the House, right? They're sitting there like how do housing and immigration intersect? How do healthcare and immigration intersect? Like they're all talking, and he's getting up and saying, this is the worst healthcare, the worst, and Pierre's going on. And, Carney gets up and says, I've cut off immigration since, I got in power, there's been 60% less PR, 60% less foreign students, 60, and they're yelling back and forth. And I'm thinking, I think they missed the point. And it's interesting how they did miss the point. The point is, which they're not getting, is that this is a province that had transfer payments, had a heritage fund that was robust as a reserve to protect the citizens of Alberta. They're now cutting into it to get this money, and she's worried about it. So she wants to address it because she's being overrun with new immigrants. Right?
Of course, and you can't unring a bell after a certain period of time unless you make a really definitive move. You can't unring that bell. You're stuck with it.
Well, you see what's happening in the U.S. when they're trying now.
Yeah.
So, they let
civil unrest
because they let all these people in and try to remove them out. So, she's trying to do it. But the funny thing is, on the federal side, these two guys are standing up and they're going back and forth grandstanding on what they've done. But what they don't acknowledge is what they have done has not been enough.
Right.
And it's instigated the problem. So, Pierre can say whatever he wants to say, but this problem happened on his watch too. Carney can say whatever he wants to say, but Carney's there. He was there behind the scenes. Now he's in front of the scenes, and we still have the problem. So what do you do with it now? And is she right? So the thing is, what they never address is the only way to get a balanced budget back, not hoping, because, hoping that a commodity goes up in price is a wonderful thing. But, hope is beautiful, but quite frankly, it's hard to sell, right? So you can hope that oil goes up, to your point. You can hope that it increases to $65, $70, $75 a barrel. You don't know. You don't know. So she has to do a budget that really, with her current circumstances. And so.
No, it's a little more free form at the moment. She has to she has to create new boundaries around
her budget is now.
Her budget, yeah.
Her budget, I really thought it was kind of funny because they both failed to address the issue that she's trying to address. And she's trying to do it through a referendum, but she's actually putting it back to the people to say, I'm in a bind. We're in a deficit. I don't want to be in a deficit. I don't want to see our heritage reserve go down. I want to get this resolved. What do I do? And I had liked that. I've said it on shows before with you, Mike. I lived in the States for 12 years. I like referendums.
Well, it lights a these, like you point out. Suddenly we're talking about it in Parliament, right? I mean, and a lot of Jeevan, a lot of the things you've mentioned today, suddenly through the lens of Alberta, are starting to show up on the docket at Parliament. So regardless of what happens with the movement or even with the referendum, you're right. It seemed to be like a wake-up call.
I don't know why.
Every poll, every Canadian article, everything about our finances and our healthcare system and our immigration has been out there for months and months and months.
But maybe all the other premiers are too afraid to address, and that's what I loved about this speech. Every other premier is afraid to address this issue. I'm afraid to say immigration. I'm afraid to say that the costs are too high right now, and I'm afraid to say it. She had no worries. She got up there and just said, that's what it is. Right? Now that started a conversation. You notice that for the most part, in every other province, it's been pretty quiet.
Absolutely. Now,
Yeah.
since this conversation, now we see the East Coast standing up saying, we're
Yeah.
basically broke and we have no industry and our healthcare is failing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
And
now,
by the way, you sent a bunch of PR people down here to try to get citizenship, and now we're taking care of them and trying to get them housing.
yeah.
And we're having them, going to school.
Yeah.
What do we do?
That's a good. So anyway, it was, I do actually, I reflect that because I did get the same vibe out of that speech. Like, okay, come on, this is the wake up call. I think at least as an Albertan, that must feel pretty good.
Yeah, and I agree with Paul. The rest of Canada, our politicians are so weak. They're so afraid to say what's true and what should be the policy of each provincial government to counter immigration, to counter the high crime rates we have, and not just keep appeasing immigrants to sort of relay the message, we're kind, compassionate people, just vote for me. But I will repeat the question that Danielle had asked about immigration so that we're clear. It says, do you support the government of Alberta introducing a law mandating that only Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and individuals with an Alberta-approved immigration status will be eligible for provincially funded programs such as healthcare, education, and other social services? She's brought the issue to the forefront now. Like, please address it because we can't afford it anymore. And this is an issue that's going to keep coming up and up. Now, my other concern is that as soon as Carney obtains a majority, I believe the probability is very high he will issue asylum to all the illegals that are here, all the students that are here. They've declared a lot of students who have expired visas for studying are now claiming refugee status. So then they go on a 2-year program with funding. And so this is another issue that's coming up. And she's kind of already addressing this in these questions, right? That we're going to be faced with a major issue. Yeah. And so I believe this has to be addressed right away. But the other premiers and even the prime ministers so scared to address it. They should not be empowered. They should not be elected. They should just have simply another job.
Yeah, and and then the next 4 questions, which I thought, and I really wanted to get your opinion on. She goes on, she says, have provincial governments and not federal government select the justices appointed to the province's King's Bench and Appeals Court.
Very specific.
Very specific, right? So that's something she really wants changed.
Yeah,
She wants,
and the reason, Paul, she brought it up because Quebec has all of that. They they're participating in who their judges are going to be, and Alberta says, yeah, we want the same. And Carney has come out, and so far nobody's addressing these. They kind of said no, they will be federally appointed, and so this is another. So these issues are, the average citizen just doesn't pay attention. They quietly go along living their lives. And in the meantime, the Federals, the Liberal Party, is instituting these types of policies. And don't forget, I believe this was instituted by, was it Pierre Trudeau that instituted this? I have to check up on that, but I don't want to say he did it. But, these are very important policies to provincial governments. And so far, nobody's addressing it. It just leads people to think about independence further. And before I forget,
bail reform.
Yeah.
You don't get bail reform by putting federally appointed judges from Ottawa in a Calgary courthouse. You don't create the right understanding of that community's needs and how to respond to it. And then you also seem, maybe I'm wrong about this, guys, and you can correct me, you seem to put this liberal stamp of approval on the thinking of that judiciary.
Right, which is, it's interesting how, different it is. I'm going to bring up the US for a minute, having lived there for a longer period of time. It's interesting how controversial that court is. Gaining control of that Supreme Court, you're seeing it now, right, with this tariff decision and all the overruling and him now having to embargo. Like, it is a very, the control position of your courts are very integral to the running of your country. And she's getting it, right? Yeah. She's saying, to Jeevan's point, you're watching the wheels turn. She's saying, I want what Quebec has, because then I can control how I run my province.
Yeah, it keeps an eye on fraud. It keeps an eye on corporate crime.
And let me say this. Did you hear her say that afterwards she was asked a question? 80% of the judges that are appointed by the Liberal Party, the judges are Liberal, and they've contributed to the Liberal Party. Yeah. Why is that not a conflict? Okay. Why are judges allowed to contribute to parties? They should not be. This is a conflict. And then you get all these judges in Alberta that are of the Liberal mindset. And we're not like that.
Right. And then she says, abolish the unelected federal Senate. That was interesting.
It's a heavy one. Okay. All right.
Like, okay.
That should be number one.
Yeah, it actually probably should. Yeah. It's a hard number one to hit first. You have to admit.
I don't know if you remember, Mike, let me say this. I don't know if you remember years ago when Harper was in power, there was one senator. He never bothered to show up for any any Senate hearings, meetings. He was living in Mexico and collecting his $170,000 a year. So that's
it's
the type
good
of
work if you can get it, Jeevan.
So
I like
the next
Governor
one. Allow the provinces to opt out of the federal programs intruding on provincial jurisdictions such as health, education, social services, without losing any of the associated federal funding for use in their own provincial social programs.
Well, I mean, I really believe that this is something every province should probably look at demanding.
Yeah.
Because everybody needs to have a balanced budget to go out there with, but they do need the funding. I mean, it's only fair that they have control of the money that goes toward funding things like healthcare and education.
Exactly.
Because they can maximize it that way. It's not as tied to government tax incentives or this kind of building process, or it just allows that province to do the best they possibly can. And then if you need to, top up the budget, you're responsible for that as a province.
Right. Which social program in Canada is working really well right now?
Right.
Yeah. So
because it isn't a pinpointed, targeted approach.
No.
Province by province or city by city.
Yeah. Money goes up, money comes down. Yeah. Quite frankly, it gets allocated to programs. Programs don't work. You can't affect them.
How many stops does the money make on the way to Alberta, for God's sake? Yeah. I mean, by the time $10 gets to Alberta, it must be $3. I'm just thinking,
Well, yeah. I think the Senate is a social program.
Ah. Oh, I did not know that. Oh, thank you, John. All right.
The senators do nothing. They get paid.
Okay. If you could do it from Mexico, it does sound like a social program that maybe we need to look at.
So then she passed it. So go ahead.
Sorry. I'd just like to add before we forget. She also made a point that the temporary foreign workers who come to Canada should bring in their own insurance. And, Alberta doesn't demand it. But Ontario does. Ontario says if you're temporary or foreign worker, bring your own insurance. So all these questions, Paul and Mike, it's leading up for me to think, we're such a vast country that if we don't have localized decision makers, it doesn't work. We have vast country, thinly populated. We have to have local governments controlling most of their decision making, and it's very difficult to have central power.
Oh, I agree. And I think, in your earlier comment when we started the show, you mentioned that you think that pretty much it's going to pass, the referendum on this is going to be positive. So they're going to basically vote yes It's going to be an overwhelming yes to all these questions. So these 9 questions will be checkmarked yes, it's going to come through. And she's going to have a mandate from the people then to go to the other provinces and say, join me in talking to Ottawa about this. Who do we think is going to come? Who do we think? That's an interesting thing. So now she's going to be sitting with a mandate from her constituents to go forward.
I'm going to name them.
Okay.
Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, guaranteed.
Yeah, I'd probably, yes.
Look at Winnipeg, the middle class. We did a show yesterday.
Yeah.
The middle class in Winnipeg has disappeared. Manitoba.
They have to do something.
I think that that the self-righteous centers of the universe, Vancouver and Toronto, will scoff at this.
But it depends. It's interesting. So
the success rate might, like, momentum has a lot to do with this.
We're struggling. So in Ontario right now, we're starting to see some of the cracks, right? So we're cutting education funding. We're talking about cutting healthcare funding, because I think what they're seeing that they're not talking to us about is that they're far exceeding their budget deficits. So the 11, 12, 14, 16 billion dollars they said we're going over, I think they're seeing that this thing is going to go worse, right? So I think we're coming to the end of the fiscal year. They're seeing this thing kind of exploding. So all of a sudden, these announcements that are coming out, we've gotten past the mandate of elections, and now we're actually sitting there and we're going, it's not so great. So, which then actually kind of ties her questions into where we're going. It's interesting to watch, right? Because
you might be right. She might have positioned these questions just as much for the other provinces,
I think so,
as she did for her own province. Many similar issues.
I think these premier meetings they have, I think there's a dinner going on, and at some point she asks for the room and she says, here's where I'm going, right? Just so you know.
Or even better, they're like, Danielle, we need you to do something. It may be that.
Look like it. It did look.
Yeah,
like
you know what? You're right. They need. I think the other premiers are looking for a leader to kind of lead the way. Same as the independence movement. Like I said, it's been in Alberta since the mid '70s, and for the last 50 years, they've been looking for a strong organization with strong leaders, and this is what's really fueled the independence movement, because we've got those in place now. And maybe some of these other premiers are saying, okay, you know what? I think Premier Smith has a lot of courage, and I think we should support her. So it's opened the door. And this is the conversations that are needed and should have happened, years ago. And when Peter Lougheed was in power in Alberta, it had happened to a certain extent, but not to the depth of these, because at that time it was a different time.
Well, it's interesting to see Alberta kind of leading the way on the tough questions. I think that's what we're seeing to start with. Jeevan, thank you so much. Please come back as the referendum gets closer or issues cross your mind. It's nice, as we always point out, whether we agree or not. I don't want Alberta to leave. You know my feelings on that. I need you guys to stay. I like the whole arrangement personally, and I think many Canadians do. But I think the issues that you raise are important to all of us, and that we have these conversations, Paul, I think is really important.
I do too.
Thanks, Jeevan.
Thank you. And I truly appreciate the opportunity that you provide me to discuss these issues and my own opinions. I'm not a party leader. I'm just a single person that's involved in the movement. And I'm hoping for Alberta independence, because I think we'll never escape the Liberal Party's policies, ways they have.
Well, I'll tell you guys this. When I start the Kingdom of Lobster, which is known as the East Coast of Canada now, and I compact us all together, we'll join the referendum movement as well.
I have one more point to make. one is, I forgot to say this at when we're talking about floor crossing. Did you know there was a motion made in the House of Commons, I don't know when, Pierre Poilievre was an MP. He voted against it.
Oh. Against floor crossing?
Yeah, it seems just downright not patriotic.
Oh, yeah.
So at least that. Well, thanks very much, Jeevan.
Thank you very much.
We did an episode previously with Jeevan. If you want to go deeper into the topic of independence, more so than we even did today, I encourage you to go back in time, subscribe, tell a friend about it. And Jeevan, do you mind people reaching out to you with questions, comments, or, I don't know, donations?
I will reach out to people and ask for donations to the independence movement as well as to Patriot Love.
All right. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, my man. We'll see you next time. And we'll see you next time right here on
Thank you.
TPL. Go to tplmedia.ca for more great content and to keep the wheels on the cart. We appreciate the support.